The Chicago night, cold and biting, suddenly shattered as the steel cables shrieked like a curse. High above, the massive crystal chandelier began to slip from its mount, preparing for a lethal plunge. Maya Sterling, the most powerful woman in the state, was completely unaware of the death hanging directly over her head. Rip. A tattered figure lunged forward, tearing through the luxurious gold silk, exposing her vulnerability before the cameras. Crash. The crystal mass plummeted, crushing the stone floor where she had stood just a second before. Amidst the swirling dust, Elias was pinned to the ground, his eyes locked onto Maya, filled with a silent agony. They called him a madman, but the truth lay hidden within his worn-out backpack. Stay with us, and give us a subscribe for salvation sometimes begins with a tear. The flash of cameras erupted, over and over, like an electromagnetic storm, surrounding Maya Sterling as she stepped out of her glossy black limousine. Tonight, she was not just a lawyer, she was the living embodiment of the American dream, radiant in a gown of gold silk, flowing with every proud stride across the red carpet. The crowd roared, their lenses hungry to capture every lavish moment of the most powerful black woman in the state of Illinois. But just a few meters away, beyond the security barrier, Elias Thorne stood, motionless like a weathered bronze statue, amidst the rushing tide of life. While the entire world was fixated on Maya's mesmerizing beauty, the clouded eyes of Elias were locked onto a tiny black speck on the soaring ceiling of the hotel lobby. As a former combat engineer, his ears were cruelly sharp, tuned to the dry, hollow rasp of fatiguing metal. Click. A single steel cable of the massive crystal chandelier snapped. Elias held his breath. He knew the Grim Reaper was counting down, second by second. Without a word of warning, without a single hesitation, he lunged. His aging legs suddenly exploded with power, like a wounded predator. He shoulder-charged through two distracted security guards, bypassing the honor guard, as the guests watched in absolute shock. "Stop him, that madman!" The security chief's shout rang out, followed by the metallic clatter of rifles being chambered. Maya spun around, her face pale with terror, as she saw the disheveled, pungent man charging directly at her with his rough hands outstretched. She tried to run, but her high heels and the heavy, trailing hem of her gown held her prisoner. Elias knew he didn't have enough time to push her away. The chandelier had already begun to tilt sharply to one side. In a desperate final effort, he grabbed the long, floor-sweeping silk train of the expensive dress and yanked with every ounce of his being. Rip! That sound was sharper than a gunshot. The rare, precious silk tore wide open, exposing Maya's vulnerability in front of the massive crowd. She tumbled backward, rolling across the red carpet just as a massive explosion echoed through the hall. Crash! Tons of crystal collapsed, turning the granite floor into thousands of razor-sharp shards. The wind from the impact sent debris flying in every direction. Maya lay there, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath shallow as she stared at the spot where she had been standing only a second before, now a horrifying heap of ruins. She was alive, but her dignity had been torn to shreds by the hands of the man she now hated most. Amidst the ash and dust, Elias was slammed to the floor, blood trickling from his forehead into his eyes, yet he did not resist. He only looked at Maya silently, his gaze devoid of aggression, filled only with a strange serenity of a soldier who had just completed the final mission of his life. A mission that this world would never understand, at least, not yet. Police sirens wailed, piercing the thick air of terror mixed with a sudden, erupting fury. Chicago tonight had no room for gratitude, only eyes like bullets, aimed straight at the man pinned to the marble floor. Elias Thorne was brutally hauled up, the cold steel of handcuffs snapping tightly around his thin, bony wrists. The crowd around the red carpet, those who had just escaped death by a fraction of an inch, now turned to attack him with the most poisonous insults. Pervert, scum, send him to hell. The curses rose in unison, like a symphony of madness. Maya Sterling stood there, amidst crystal shards sparkling like diamonds, but her soul was bleeding. She looked down at her shredded gown, felt her bare shoulders exposed to 1,000 lenses, and felt a humiliation more painful than death itself. To her, image was everything, reputation was a religion, and Elias had just torn that faith apart on live television. She didn't look at the wreckage of the chandelier. She only saw Elias's filthy hands and allowed hatred to drown out her reason. Within minutes, social media exploded, a sloppily edited video spreading at the speed of light. The headline read, Homeless man sexually assaults female lawyer in the middle of a gala. No one cared about the snapped cable. No one noticed the moment he saved her life. People only saw a disheveled black man violating a symbol of success. Elias was shoved into a patrol car, his face pressed against the fogged glass, watching Maya's silhouette being shielded by expensive coats. He didn't defend himself, didn't cry out his innocence. He simply accepted the sentence the world had just passed on him. At the precinct, reporters swarmed, camera flashes flickering incessantly, turning the night into a public execution by media. They wanted a monster to blame, and they had found Elias. A veteran who once swore to protect his country was now being treated like trash by his own countrymen, something to be swept away. In the darkness of the cold holding cell, Elias only gave a faint smile, a smile full of bitterness. He knew well that in this city, people would rather believe a magnificent lie than accept a truth that was raw and messy. His sentence had been handed down long before he ever touched that silk, the sentence of a prejudice that ran deep in the very veins of this society. That sentence wasn't written in ink, but in the cruel prejudices that ran deep through the veins of this society. They didn't need the truth, they only needed a villain to soothe their own fears. Elias Thorne sat there, alone between four grey walls, silently waiting for the most violent storm of his life to begin. A hero in chains, shackled by the very kindness he had given without a second thought. Inside the 1st District Precinct, the chill from the air conditioner drifts down, as biting as the hearts of Chicagoans tonight. Elias Thorne sits motionless on a cold steel bench, his hands interlaced, revealing the calluses and old scars of a time spent amidst bombs and bullets. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling flicker, emitting a constant, irritating hum, casting shadows over the dark skin of a man the entire world has turned its back on. On the other side of the one-way glass, detectives watch him with cold detachment. They see a dangerous vagrant, but Elias only sees the ghost of his own past. A young public defender enters, dropping a file on the table with an exhausted sigh, looking at Elias not as a client, but as a difficult puzzle to solve. "Why aren't you saying anything, Mr. Thorne? They're demanding 10 years in prison for you." Elias looks up, his eyes clouded yet deep, holding a calmness that is terrifying. He doesn't offer a defense, he doesn't mention the sound of the snapping cable, and he doesn't bring up the fact that he was once a brave combat engineer. His silence is not an admission of guilt, but a quiet contempt for a system that only judges people by the labels they wear. Out in the hallway, the sharp click of Maya Sterling's heels echoes, dry and full of hatred. She has come to sign the formal complaint, to ensure this man disappears forever. Elias hears those footsteps, and his heart tightens, not out of fear, but from an ache that has lasted for 2 decades. He stares into the void, where the shadows seem to be telling a different story of an unmarked grave and an unfulfilled oath. This silence is a protective shell, guarding a secret greater than his own life, a secret that, if revealed, would cause Maya Sterling's entire world to crumble. The holding cell has become a monastery of penance, where Elias Thorne imprisons his own soul before the law even has a chance to do so. He doesn't need the court's forgiveness. He only needs to know that the daughter of the man from years ago still has the breath to curse him. An officer's voice cuts through the thick air, but Elias remains like a stone statue, silent and shrouded in mystery. The silence of the outcast sometimes resonates more powerfully than 1,000 justifications. It poses a massive question to the consciences of those standing in the light. Is the darkness beneath our feet truly where the worst evils reside, or is it the place where the last bits of kindness are seeking refuge? Elias Thorne remains there, waiting for the most violent storm, with the mindset of a soldier who died in his heart a long time ago. Even facing death or chains, he chooses to hold on to the final piece of a past filled with blood and tears. The mist of memory begins to swirl, drifting Elias back to a torrential, rainy night 20 years ago. Back then, he wasn't a homeless man, but a young police officer, wearing a crisp uniform and a heart full of pride. Chicago that night was submerged in the thunderous echoes of gunfire from drug raids. Elias and his partner were chasing a dangerous suspect into a dark alleyway, thick with the stench of trash and death. In the flickering, dim light of broken street lamps, a figure suddenly lunged out, hands clutching something metallic. Bang! Elias fired by reflex, a cold shot that tore through the curtain of rain. But as that figure fell, Elias's heart seemed to stop. It wasn't a criminal, but an honest black man, rushing home with a loaf of bread in his hands. That man was Maya's father. In his final breath, he didn't curse. He only looked at the badge on Elias's chest with an unspeakable shock. Elias knelt in the pool of blood, his hands trembling, trying in vain to plug the wound. That night, the life of a hero died, giving way to a ghost haunted by guilt. He wasn't sentenced to prison because the legal system called it an occupational accident, but Elias passed a life sentence of penance upon himself. He left the force, left his family, and chose a life on the streets so he would never be allowed to forget that man's face. He spent 20 years watching over the orphaned Maya, seeing her grow up in the absence of a father's love. Every cent of his meager veteran benefits, Elias secretly sent to a scholarship fund under an anonymous name to help her step into law school. He lived like a guardian ghost, standing at street corners to watch her graduate, watch her win her first case, and watch her become an icon of justice. Elias didn't need forgiveness because he knew he didn't deserve it. He only wanted to be a protective leaf for the flower he had accidentally withered years ago. The mistake of that night is a scar that never heals, an invisible and agonizing bond between an unintended killer and a tragic victim. Every time he closes his eyes, Elias still hears that gunshot ring out and sees the eyes of Maya's father, a reminder of the blood debt he must pay with his entire life. Elias's tragedy isn't that he lost everything, but that he has to live with the weight of a human life on his shoulders. He chose isolation and social contempt as a way to punish himself, to keep his soul from vanishing into the darkness of oblivion. That fateful night turned a brave soldier into a disheveled homeless man, but it also forged a silent sacrifice far beyond human understanding. Elias Thorne does not run from the past. He carries it with him like a heavy cross on the road to a redemption that perhaps only death can grant. For 20 years he hasn't lived for himself. He lived to repay a departed soul and to ensure that the little girl from long ago would never have to suffer another wound. It is a sad ballad, written in blood and tears on the cold streets of Chicago, where kindness must sometimes wear the face of a crime. Elias Thorne, the killer and the protector, still walks through the mist of destiny, waiting for the day that this debt is finally settled in full. He carries the burden of the past, seeking a redemption that feels forever out of reach, yet never stops protecting her. In the bustling law office, Maya Sterling sat silently before the weathered canvas backpack, the only piece of evidence seized by the police from Elias. The scent of dust, the chill of Chicago's sidewalks, and the musk of passing time drifted out, making her wince with a flicker of disgust. She donned white gloves, intending to find a shred of evidence to nail this villain to the gallows of public opinion. But, as the rusted zipper groaned open, a completely different world emerged, making her heart tremble. There were no daggers, no drugs, none of the filth she had imagined. The first thing Maya touched was a stack of deposit receipts, faded by the years, spanning 2 decades. Those small slips of paper, smoothed out flat, recorded every anonymous scholarship payment Maya had received as a poor orphan girl. Maya held her breath, her hands shaking as she flipped through more old scraps. They were photographs. Pictures of her taken from a distance, blurry yet filled with reverence. Her on her first day of elementary school in hand-me-down clothes, her receiving her high school diploma, and a photo of her standing before the Supreme Court on the day she received her law license. Elias Thorne had been there, always there, hiding in the shadows to record every step of her growth. A small notebook lay at the bottom of the bag, its leather cover frayed and torn, titled The Diary of Penance. Maya opened the first page and her breath hitched. March 14th, I saw the girl again. She has a smile exactly like her father's. The handwriting was neat but bore deep indentations, telling the story of a man who had imprisoned himself in darkness to protect a light he had once accidentally dimmed. The diary recorded every time Maya was sick, the moments she failed, and the times she felt most desperate. Elias had lived on the fringes of her life, picking up breadcrumbs, sleeping on cardboard boxes, just to save every spare cent for her future. Maya recognized the Silver Star, one of the U.S. military's highest honors, wrapped carefully in a scrap of cloth cut from her own old baby swaddle. The man she called a pervert, the one she wanted to lock away forever, was the guardian angel who had silently shielded her for 20 years. Hot tears fell onto the pages, blurring Elias's apologetic words. She felt small and cruel, realizing she had stood on the peak of fame using bricks built from the blood and silent sacrifice of this man. The tattered backpack was no longer trash. It was a cathedral of compassion, a testament to the strangest and most painful love Maya had ever known. She touched the rough fabric, feeling the warmth of Elias's years of hardship, a man who chose to be shunned by the entire world to buy her peace. Maya understood that the tear in her gold silk dress that night was not an attack, but the final act of redemption from a spiritual father for his child. This treasury of memories shattered every prejudice, every fake glamour, exposing a raw truth about how kindness can dwell beneath the most ragged clothes. The Chicago night was still cold, but for the first time in her life, Maya Sterling felt the heat of truth burning in her chest. She grabbed her coat and rushed out of the office, with only one thought in her mind. She had to see him. She had to apologize before it was too late. Her journey for justice was no longer about punishment. It was about saving the soul of the silent hero imprisoned in the dark. Elias Thorne, who are you in this world of lies? And why did you love a stranger so much that you were willing to destroy your own life just to protect them? The truth was clearer than ever, and it was so painful that Maya could hardly breathe in her late regret. The diary remained there, a reminder of a human debt that perhaps she could never repay in a lifetime to the man named Elias. Maya walked unconsciously through the cold corridors, her mind no longer in the present, but swept away by a wordless ballad written through the sacrifice of a ghost. For 20 years, while Maya was busy chasing brilliant dreams, Elias had turned his life into an epic of penance, silent and sacred. She closed her eyes and seemed to see him standing there, under the white snow of Chicago, his thin hands clutching a threadbare coat to give her warmth from afar. Elias needed no thank you, no touch of a hand. He only needed to see Maya walking steadily on the path her father had left unfinished. That ballad had no notes, only the sound of quiet footsteps on the pavement, the sound of wheezing breath on frozen winter nights, and the sound of a guardian's heartbeat. Maya flipped back through the diary pages. She saw herself in her loneliest moments, when she thought the world had abandoned her, yet Elias was always there, across the street, like a persistent lamppost amidst the storm. He had recorded the day she got a bad grade and sobbed on a park bench. He had recorded the day she first wore a business suit and entered the courtroom with pride. Elias had spent his entire life being the most loyal spectator, admiring her success as a way to redeem a mistake he had never forgiven himself for. His presence was terrifyingly silent, a pure love untainted by desire or self-interest, a sacrifice that only a true soldier could understand. Maya realized that every time she met with strange luck, every time invisible dangers suddenly vanished, it wasn't destiny. It was the rough hands of Elias silently clearing the thorns for her. He had lived the life of a sinner so she could live the life of a saint. He had chosen the darkness so she could shine under the camera flashes. This wordless ballad now resonated in Maya's soul like a wake-up call, stripping away her shell of arrogance and exposing a heart throbbing with regret. She felt so guilty for letting this hero endure such insult, letting him sit in a dark cell when he deserved to be honored more than anyone. Every page, every newspaper clipping about her, every blurry photo was a note in that tragic yet holy music. Elias Thorne had turned his existence into a living oath, a devotion until his final breath to make up for a family he had unintentionally shattered. In a world full of transactional exchanges, Elias's kindness emerged like a raw miracle, painful and noble, to the point of making Maya feel breathless. She ran faster, her breath heavy in the thick, cold air, feeling every year of hardship Elias had walked through just to keep her smile whole. This ballad will never end. It will forever echo in Maya's heart, reminding her of a blood debt paid with boundless love. Elias, the nameless man on the street, the warrior who never surrendered to adversity, had taught her the greatest lesson of compassion. His silent sacrifice had ripped through the veil of indifference, allowing the light of truth to shine into the darkest corners of a prejudiced Chicago. Tonight, that wordless ballad would be continued by Maya, through a journey of redemption she would spend the rest of her life fulfilling for him. Maya knew that the gold silk dress torn that night was the final note, radiant and agonizing, to complete the epic of a life devoted to another. Elias Thorne, her guardian ghost, it was finally time for him to step out of the shadows, to receive the gratitude he had always refused. Life may be cruel, but Elias's kindness proved that true love is a light that can never be extinguished, even in the deepest dungeon of oblivion. The heavy iron door of the holding cell creaked with a long, dry groan, tearing through the thick air of repentance. Maya Sterling stood there, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her shoulders trembling under the pale flicker of the fluorescent lights. Before her, Elias Thorne sat motionless, his thin, bony hands still interlaced, as if in prayer for some distant soul. When he looked up, those clouded eyes met Maya's tear-filled gaze, and a silence that felt a century long enveloped the room. Maya could not suppress a choked sob. She knelt beside the cold steel bench, her silk-gloved hands now trembling as they reached out to touch his calloused ones. Why did you do this for me? Why protect the person who has cursed you for all these years? Elias shivered slightly, instinctively trying to pull his hands away, fearing his ragged state would soil her, but Maya gripped them tight. Her voice broke through the tears. I saw the diary, I saw the scholarship receipts, I saw the silver star you kept for me. Elias Thorne let out a long sigh, a breath carrying the weight of 20 years of silent penance. He looked at Maya, his gaze no longer evasive, but filled with a compassion so deep it was heart-wrenching. I didn't need you to know. I only needed you to live, Maya. That night, when your father fell, my soul died with him, and seeing you succeed was the only thread keeping me tied to this world. Maya buried her head against his knees, her gold silk gown now stained with dust and tears, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly protected. She felt the sting of her own cruelty, realizing how she had let prejudice blind her, letting glamour obscure the magnificent, bleeding heart right beside her. Elias reached out a rough hand, gently stroking her hair, a clumsy yet sacred gesture, like a father's blessing. The truth erupted between those four grey walls, stripping away every mask of fame and status, leaving only two souls searching for a way to forgive one another. Maya understood then that the tear in her dress that night was not a scar of humiliation, but the doorway to salvation for them both. She promised him, her voice steadying amidst the sobs, that she would get him out of there, that the world would know he was a hero. Elias only smiled, a serene smile like a soldier who had finally laid down his heaviest cross after a long, weary war. The Chicago night outside remained cold, but inside that dark cell, the fire of compassion had begun to blaze, warming hearts once frozen by hatred and guilt. This confrontation was not just about the truth. It was a new beginning where humanity rose above every law and the harshest prejudices of society. The following morning, on the steps of the Cook County Courthouse, a media earthquake erupted, but this time it didn't carry fury, but the overdue remorse of an entire city. Maya Sterling stepped out, no longer in her lavish gold silk gown, but in a powerful black suit, her face hardened with an unprecedented resolve. Standing before hundreds of lenses pointed at her, she didn't speak of her own reputation. She spoke of Elias Thorne. Her voice was thunderous and steely, tearing through the fog of lies. The man you called a monster is the one who saved my life, not once, but for 20 years. Maya held up the diary of penance and the Silver Star Medal, evidence that shattered the most vicious prejudices. She publicly revealed the entire truth of the shooting years ago, personally overturning the case that the system had deliberately forgotten. Justice tonight did not reside in dry legal documents, but in the reversal of the human conscience. Maya used all her influence and the sharpness of a top-tier lawyer to strike at the public's indifference. She forced them to look at the scars on Elias's hands. She forced them to hear the sound of a dress tearing to save a life in a moment of peril. The overwhelming pressure from Maya's firm and the outrage of citizens beginning to realize the truth forced the police to drop all charges immediately. The precinct doors opened, and Elias walked out into a crowd of those who had once cursed him, but now they stood in silence, a silence heavy with respect and shame. Maya stepped forward and took his hand in front of the entire world, an act confirming that redemption was complete. She wasn't just reclaiming Elias's freedom, she was reclaiming the honor of a forgotten soldier. This was Maya's final battle, one where she fought not for money, but to return light to the man who had voluntarily lived in darkness for her sake. Her determination proved that true justice only exists when we dare to look through tattered clothes to see a noble soul. Elias looked up at the Chicago sky. For the first time in 20 years, he no longer saw himself as a guilty ghost. Salvation had arrived, as powerful and radiant as the morning sun, sweeping away the remnants of a painful past. Justice had shifted, and in that moment, the heart of an entire city seemed washed clean by compassion. Maya and Elias, two people once separated by the barrel of a gun, now stood together as a symbol of a renewed faith in humanity. This battle was won, not in a courtroom, but in the very hearts of the American people tonight. The golden cinnamon sunset settles over the shores of Lake Michigan, gilding the water with shimmering fragments of light, as if to soothe the unhealed wounds of Chicago. On a wooden park bench, where Elias sat in solitude for so many years, there is now a familiar silhouette. Maya Sterling sits there, stripped of the glamour of a legal superstar. She is simply a daughter who found a father, a soul that found a harbor. Elias looks into the distance, his eyes no longer clouded by the agony of torment, but reflecting a strange, profound serenity. He is no longer a ghost, and she is no longer an indifferent icon. The story of the tear in the gold silk dress has become a modern legend, reminding us that a person's value does not lie in their outer shell, but in the silent sacrifices made in the shadows. The deepest human lesson is not merely forgiveness, but understanding. We are often too quick to judge a tattered outfit or a gaunt face, forgetting that beneath that layer of dust may lie the greatest heart we have ever encountered. True justice is not just the enforcement of law, it is the restoration of dignity to those the world has forgotten. Elias Thorne taught the world that true love needs no words, no recognition. It only needs presence and total devotion. Life is a series of tears, but it is precisely through those tears that the light of compassion can pierce through and warm the world. Maya looks at Elias, leaning her head gently on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of final redemption. Chicago remains bustling, but tonight it seems gentler because people have begun to look at one another through the eyes of the soul rather than through prejudice. Pause for a moment in the rush of life. Listen to the wordless ballads echoing around us, and to know that each of us can be a guardian angel in someone's life. The light has returned, not from the flash of a camera, but from the smouldering fire of humanity, reignited from the ashes of the past. Elias offers a faint, complete smile, marking the end of a painful journey and the beginning of a chapter filled with hope. This lesson of kindness will endure as a reminder that no matter how cruel the world becomes, goodness remains the most priceless treasure humans can bestow upon one another. Tonight, Elias Thorne can finally sleep deeply in the peace he spent an entire lifetime searching for.